Good Tuesday evening, June. I'm dreaming of January because I was so hot today. Not that the weather was so hot here in Ottawa, but the fact is that I was hot. I was sitting in a living room, in my living room, and we have big windows open out into the northwest. And so as the day progresses, it gets increasingly hot. And I spent most of the day out, but late this afternoon, I was sitting in the living room in the sun and I was exceptionally hot. So heat is on my mind. And I was talking to somebody today who was telling me that they're looking forward to the winter. And so I told him, I said, well, the good news is today is June the 13th, not January the 13th, as I said before. And we're only a couple of weeks away from what? 1 week away, actually, from the days starting to get shorter. So for those of you who miss the cold winter weather, hang on. It's on its way back. Of course, we still have to go through the summer. Anyway, thanks for joining. You are tuned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for June 13th, 2023. I'm your host, Joseph Ben-Ami. And as I say, thank you so much for joining. Tonight, conspiracies to the left of me, conspiracies to the right of me. What is a person supposed to do? That's the subject of tonight's show. But as always, before we get into the topic, I want to go over a few headlines that caught my eye that I thought might be interesting to you. The first headline tonight I want to touch on is that the RCMP here in Canada, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that's our federal police force. It also fills a function of provincial police in some provinces, but that's beside the point. If you're outside of Canada, maybe you've heard of the Mounties. That's the slang sort of cute name that we use for them. The Mounties, their nickname. And the reason is because originally they were mounted police. They were riding horses, mostly in Western Canada, because the Royal Canadian Mounted Police used to be the Northwest Mounted Police. Not a lot of people know that. Anyway, the Mounties are investigating, we learned today, over 100 allegations of foreign interference in our elections. Over 100 investigations currently going on by the federal police force here in Canada. Now, I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a little surprised by this. One would have thought that we'd have heard of these investigations before. Of course, the rapporteur, David Johnston, who recently stepped down as rapporteur, alluded to these investigations in his report to Parliament when he suggested that maybe a public inquiry was not the right way to go because it might interfere with ongoing, let's call them, intelligence operations. Well, whether it's intelligence operations being run by CSIS, which is our domestic security agency here in Canada, or by the federal police, the RCMP, there is an element of concern that we all should have as we all jump on the public inquiry bandwagon. There are some concerns, and they're very legitimate, they're very valid, that a public inquiry at this stage might interfere in some of those investigations. So I would suggest that everybody that's calling for it maybe just think about that a little bit. I'm not against holding a public inquiry. I think probably it's better to hold off until the police come back with reports on how these investigations are going. Are they still open? Are they closing them? Are arrests being made? What recommendations are coming? We could do all of that without a public inquiry. And I understand that people want to see that this is being taken care of, and a public inquiry would perhaps offer some answers. But I do have that concern. It's a concern that was raised by David Johnston when he was recommending against holding a public inquiry, certainly at this stage. And this, I think, headline probably to a certain degree vindicates the former Governor General on that particular position. Again, I'm not saying let's not hold a public inquiry. And if that's what people want to do, by all means, let's do it. But let's recognize that the concern is not invalid, and it was not an attempt by the former Governor General to protect and defend the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, or his family, as I have been hearing from many people on my side of the political spectrum. Okay, let's put that on the shelf. We'll bring it up again, perhaps, as we talk about this whole conspiracy theory business. The Financial Accountability Office in the province of Ontario, the Canadian province where I live, is reporting that Ontario will probably have, over the next few years, an excess of $22.68 billion that could be used on programs or debt. It could be used on either of those. It turns out, according to the FAO, that the spending programs that have been put together by the Ford government here in Ontario looks like they're going to be spending a little over $22 billion less than they're bringing in revenue. And that's always a good thing. But I guess what gets me is this automatic thing that, oh, look, we have money. Let's spend it on more programs. The fact is, we always talk about surpluses. We want to have surpluses. I don't want to have surpluses. I want to have balanced budgets. Now, if you're going to have a spending surplus, an operational surplus, which means that you're actually spending less on programs than you're bringing in revenue, so your operating budget may in fact be in a surplus position, but that's when you take that money and you pay down your debt. And we have a lot of extra debt to pay. But whether we're paying debt or not, and we're always paying debt, by the way, because debt is built into the budget of the government already. So when you have a surplus, that's above and beyond the debt that you are already paying as part of your budget. What a surplus actually means, ladies and gentlemen, is overtaxation. It means that the government is taxing you more than it needs to meet its full financial obligations, which is both program spending and servicing the debt. Now, I'm not against saving interest by relieving debt earlier, deleveraging, as you were. But at the same time, whether we're doing that or we're not, the fact is surpluses mean overtaxation. So we shouldn't be driving for surpluses, ladies and gentlemen. We should be driving for balanced budgets. And of course, sometimes the budget is going to go into a deficit. Sometimes it'll go into a little bit of a surplus. But over a period of time, the trend should be balanced. Okay, that's all. It's really not rocket science. But I always get nervous when I hear government officials talking about how we're going to have extra money to spend on different programs. Let's come up with a new way to spend money. You know, I have a great idea. My idea is you want to help people who are having difficulty making ends meet. We have heard nothing. If you've missed all of the talk about inflation and all of the great things the government is going to do to help us, look, they're giving us a grocery rebate. Look, they're giving you a GST rebate if you're at the lower end of the economic scale. Look, they're giving you a rebate on carbon tax. I don't want rebates. I want lower taxation for everybody. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you help people make ends meet. You don't say to them, well, struggle, 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 and then when you file your tax return next year, you might qualify for some money back. Your money. They're taking your money and then they're promising to give it back to you because they don't need it. So the answer, if you're in the government and you want to help people make ends meet, we don't need more programming for that. What we need, ladies and gentlemen, is lower taxes. Taxes and the cost associated with overregulation are the two greatest expenses on people's budgets, personal household budgets. It may not show up as taxes, but believe me, it's there. Okay, what else is happening? Cargo loaders at BC's ports, British Columbia ports, have voted overwhelmingly in favor of strikes. So we're waiting to see what's happening. It's the International Longshore and Warehouse Union in Canada. So they had a vote over the weekend, 99.24% support for strike action. Okay, if you say so. That's pretty high. But I'll take it at face value. It doesn't matter whether it's 99% or 90 or 75%. They voted in favor of striking, and that's what's going to happen if they don't come to some sort of a settlement. And that's bad news for the Canadian economy, bad news for the BC economy, bad news for Vancouver, bad news for everybody if they go on strike. Okay, this is a major port for the export of Canadian goods going overseas and for importing goods from overseas. So we don't want them to go on strike. We don't want them to go on strike, and if they do, they won't be on strike for very long. That's my prediction. The government's going to have to step in and take action. Moving on to international headlines. I'm just pulling something here. There we go. It is the subject that just won't go away. No matter how much I don't want to talk about it, how can I not? Donald Trump was in court today in Miami, pleading not guilty to 37 criminal charges in his classified documents case. I don't know what's going on here. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we get into the meat of the show, the second segment. But, you know, I feel sometimes like the United States is turning into some kind of a banana republic, and that's a serious concern for all of us around the world, because a weak America equals a dangerous and unstable world. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there on the left of the political spectrum that don't agree with that, but I'm telling you, this isn't a right-wing, left-wing thing, and this isn't a Donald Trump thing or a Joe Biden thing. All of those factors come into play here. But the bottom line is this: whoever's in charge, whatever's going on, when this kind of thing is happening in the United States, it's bad for everybody in the world. And we see it. We see it every day. If you're not looking and seeing the world turning into a more dangerous place, bad characters acting badly, openly, defying the international order, it's not just in Eastern Europe. What China's doing, North Korea, Iran, very serious concerns. And all we could do is hope and pray that the Americans, that you, my friends down south of the border, at some point in time, you're going to have to get your house in order, and you're going to have to recover some of your moral and even martial strength and fortitude and character. Because we're all depending on you. I'm sorry. I know that it's unfortunate. You didn't ask for it, but you're the big kids on the block. You're the big brother, like it or not. Here's something interesting. You're going to like this. A woman who was declared dead in Ecuador, apparently during her wake, woke up and started knocking on her coffin. And the beauty of this headline is, okay, it says, woman declared dead in Ecuador knocks on her coffin during her wake. Health authorities investigate. Do you think? Anyway, she's 75 years old. She was declared dead at a hospital in Ecuador. And in the middle of the wake, there was knocking on her coffin. and lo and behold, they opened up the coffin and she was awake. It gave us all a fright, said said one of the people present at the wake. I can well imagine. Gosh, I don't know how I would react. Two things. I don't know how I would react, to be honest, if I was in the situation where I was at a wake at a funeral and all of a sudden somebody started banging on the coffin from the inside and we discovered that person was actually still alive. But worse than that, can you imagine being the person in the coffin? I mean, my goodness gracious, ladies and gentlemen. You wake up, you're looking around, it's dark. You're in this, if you're in a nice, expensive coffin, presumably you're lying there. You rub your chest, you realize that somebody's dressed you in your best clothes. Beautiful satin bed, pillows. You couldn't be more comfortable. A little stuffy. How do you react to that? Hello? Anyway, yeah, so apparently this happened. And as I said, health authorities are investigating. Okay, good. Final headline I wanted to bring to your attention tonight. French authorities have uncovered a major disinformation campaign by the Russians. Fake news. Fake news is a real thing. How's that for a paradoxical type of statement? Fake news made to look like they were published by prominent French news media. Yeah. Now, I'm just trying to think how much of this is actually going on? How much of the distrust and the concern and all of the conspiracies out there are really just international players that are just trying to foment discord in our countries? I think it's a fair question to ask. I don't have the answer to that. We're going to follow that story a little more closely as we go forward. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to take a break. So stick with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. All right, we are back. Thanks for sticking with us. You're turned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for June the 13th, 2023. That's me. That's not your internet connection or anything like that. Appreciate you sticking with us. We are talking tonight about conspiracy theories and catastrophists. Catastrophists are mostly on the left, conspiracy theorists mostly on the right. And who are you supposed to believe anymore? Let's start for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, with the wildfires that are occurring here in Canada. You know, first of all, the wildfires, we are in a period of higher than normal number of wildfires. And as a consequence of having more wildfires in Canada at this moment in time than normal, it is entirely reasonable that we are going to have larger swaths of territory burned at this point in time than we normally would as well. Now, in statistics, you get sometimes wildly off the chart results, and you get sometimes, and that could be exaggerated. It could be exaggerated in fewer, for instance, okay? And we call those outliers. And typically, we don't really consider the outliers when we're looking at trends. Now, every single person who has listened to this show will tell you, will know that I say again and again and again, when it comes to climate change, you can't just look at one instance. You can't look at one year. You can't look at 4 years or 5 years or even 10 years. You have to look at trends over decades before you can determine exactly what direction the climate is changing. Climate change is a natural occurring thing, and we need to know what direction the climate is changing. So the fact that the temperature might go up for a few years in a row, it's also going to go down for a few years in a row. We don't know what the trend is, and trends by definition are long term. Now the reason I'm saying this is because, again, what you're hearing today from the US government and from the Canadian government is alarm bells being sounded about climate change. And what they're saying is, look at these wildfires. We are having more wildfires possibly than we have in the 21st century so far. That was what we heard from Bill Blair today. I'm not sure that I agree with that, but who cares? Because this is 1 year, and you're always going to have more or less. You're never going to have exactly the same number of wildfires. So sometimes you're going to set a record. And if that happens to be this year, well, then it's this year. But it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's not evidence of climate change because it doesn't indicate a trend. A trend would be every year for the past 50 years, the number of wildfires have been going up. And even then, you cannot make an automatic connection between any trend in the increase or decrease of wildfires and climate change. Okay, so you've heard me say that. It makes perfect sense. And my friends on the right, the people who I share my political camp with, know that this is the case, and they often cite that argument in opposition to the arguments about climate change. So this just raises an important question. Why then would you look at the wildfires this year and say there's no other explanation for these wildfires than that they were deliberately set as a means of producing evidence in favor of climate change policy? And I'm hearing that everywhere from my friends in the quote-unquote conservative camp. And I say quote-unquote conservative camp because, and I know I'm going to start to get into trouble with this, but I like a hockey referee, call it like I see it. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that there were too many people out there who are not friends of the Liberal Party of Canada or down south in the United States. They're not Democrats. They're members of the Republican Party. And they fancy themselves to be true blue or true red, I guess, in the United States Conservatives, without really knowing what that means. So we're going to get into that at some future date in the not too distant future. A little bit more talk about what it means to be conservative. But the point I'm making here on the wildfires is that neither the claims that the government is making that this is evidence of a man-made climate change or climate change period, not only is that not a valid position to take, but it's also not valid to say that this is evidence of a conspiracy. And it's driving me crazy because you just don't know who to believe anymore. You turn on the television, you turn on your radio, you go on your computer, listen to the podcasts like this one. I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know the truth, this is the podcast to listen to. If you just want to get riled up and you want somebody cheering you on because they, rah, 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 go Leafs, go. If you're Canadian, you know exactly what that means. It may make you feel good, ladies and gentlemen, but in the final analysis, we are human beings and we have the capacity to look at the evidence around us. And conspiracies may be true. But just because there's some evidence that seems to support your conspiracy theory doesn't necessarily make it true. And so you have to look at all of the evidence. And on this wildfires thing, that's all I've been saying. But I have had, over 48 hours, tremendous grief from my so-called friends who are attacking me privately and publicly for having to say, hold the phone, calm down. Look, the fact is, in Canada, and we're not going to spend the whole show talking about wildfires, but in Canada, every year, we have somewhere around 8,000 forest fires. 8,000. Every single year, on average. Some years more, some years fewer. And of that 8,000, more than half of them are the result of human activity. And I don't mean that in the climate change sense. I mean that in the terms of careless fire management, open burning when you shouldn't be open burning. Okay, there are lots of reasons. And included in that is arson. Now all of a sudden people are waking up and they're going, well, we heard the police are investigating there might be arson. Okay, well, you haven't paid attention to this for the past year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, because this has not been making headlines for the past 3 or 4 years or longer. Because we weren't caught up in this bubble argument about climate change. But the reality is that a significant number of the man-made fires are actually set by arsonists. And there were a lot of arsonists out there. We're not talking thousands of arsonists. But still. Okay. So, easy does it, ladies and gentlemen. Easy does it. All right. Canada is not burning down, and there is probably no conspiracy run by the government to set fires here in Canada in order to help buttress their case for climate change policy. All right, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, how could we talk about conspiracy and of the left and on the right if we can't talk about COVID? So we've avoided talking about COVID for quite some time. But when we come back, let's get into it. All right? So stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me.
And we are back. Thank you for sticking with us. You're tuned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Tuesday, June the 13th, 2023. I'm your host, Joseph Ben-Ami. Thank you for sticking with us. We are talking about conspiracies on the left, conspiracies on the right, and what is a common sense person supposed to think? Where do we turn? And that's a really serious problem. It's not a problem in Russia. It's not a problem in Iran. Who cares? It's a problem here, though, because we live in a democracy. And what you and I think and how we conduct ourselves is critically important to the health and the security and the stability of our countries, of our societies. And we have enough problems without getting into unfounded conspiracy theories. All right. I told you I don't really particularly want to talk about COVID. But I don't see how we can be talking about this subject and not be bringing up the whole COVID thing. So let's go back and talk a little bit about COVID. COVID, ladies and gentlemen, with all due respect to all of my friends out there who believe deeply that this has been a very dangerous pandemic that we've emerged from, that we've dodged a bullet, that humanity was on the verge of some kind of a catastrophe, indeed, that we have experienced some kind of a catastrophe, all right, none of that's real. I'm sorry, none of that is real. I'm not going to dispute whether or not COVID was in fact a serious illness. I'm prepared to concede that point. I know people out there that are not going to, but I will. I concede that point. COVID was a serious illness. Did it ever pose the threat to us, to the safety, security, the health, the well-being of our society that was presented? The answer to that is no. It never did. And there is no question in my mind that governments around the world overreacted terribly to all of the concerns that were raised by what I call the catastrophists. A cadre of people, whether they're left-wing or right-wing, that they just, for whatever reason, I believe there's some psychological aspect to this at play, but these people sit out there and it's as though they're just waiting for something to come along that they could point to and say, oh my God, the sky is falling. And that plays out on both the left and the right. With respect to COVID, it started out on the left, if I could use that term, in relation to this COVID argument. The argument was, this is a terrible illness. We are on the verge of some kind of catastrophe for society. We have to put in place all of these restrictions. We have to force people to wear masks. We have to force people to stay home. And ultimately, we have to take measures to try to force people to get vaccinated. And in many cases, not just to try to get people to get vaccinated, but to actually force them. There were many, many people who found themselves in jobs where they were told, get vaccinated or you're going to lose your job. And all of this was predicated on the myth, quite frankly, that the world was going to come apart at the seams if we didn't take these emergency measures. Okay, so that's on the one side. Then, of course, we have, I think, a terribly inefficient, almost catastrophic campaign to acquire a vaccine on an emergency basis. And I say catastrophic because I don't think that there's any question that there are people who have died as a consequence of taking the vaccine. And there are always going to be people who react negatively to vaccines and to medications. But in this case, ladies and gentlemen, we were in such a rush to get this so-called vaccine approved that it didn't really go through the same kind of long-term rigorous testing that a normal vaccine or normal medical procedure would. And again, driven by fear, we must get this vaccine out there. And the tragedy of this is, ladies and gentlemen, that the tragedy is that the vaccine never worked. So for the people who took it and suffered some negative reaction, it was for nothing. Now, why do I say it was for nothing? And by the way, I'm vaccinated. And some people are going to go, oh my God, Ben-Ami, he's vaccinated. Shut him off right now. I don't want to hear what he has to say. And if you're one of those people, okay, go ahead. But I hope that you're going to listen to what I'm saying. I got vaccinated. I got the 2 shots. I got the 2 shots because I looked at the evidence that was coming out, and I wasn't really concerned with the negative impact. I knew that there were allegations about negative impacts of taking the vaccine. I looked at the data and I said, yes, that's true, but the probability of me suffering some sort of a catastrophic illness, pretty low, and I'm balancing it against the need to be able to do things rather than fighting with my government about being closed in, not being able to travel, etc. So I took the vaccine. And I haven't suffered any negative consequences. I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. But I didn't get a 3rd booster, and I didn't get a 4th, and I didn't get a 5th booster. And the reason I didn't is because you don't get, within the space of 2 years, 3rd, 4th, and 5th boosters for a viable effective vaccine. Doesn't happen, ladies and gentlemen. And so to call this a vaccine probably isn't even accurate. So we had this mad rush to develop a product which, irrespective of how safe it is, you might be saying, well, the numbers are very low. In fact, the numbers may be consistent with the people out there who, when they were getting the polio vaccine, have some sort of a negative reaction to it. I don't know. I haven't looked at the data. But even if the number of people that have a negative reaction to the COVID so-called vaccine is on par with other so-called vaccines, the difference between the polio vaccine, for instance, and the COVID vaccine is that the polio vaccine is effective, notwithstanding the fact that some people have a negative reaction, whereas the COVID vaccine was not effective. And so all of the people that had negative reactions to it and continue to have negative reactions if they've had the vaccine and the booster, all of those people, for what? To prevent them from getting COVID? If the vaccine was going to prevent them from getting COVID, then they didn't have to have a third or a fourth or a fifth booster. Now, that's not conspiracy theory, ladies and gentlemen. That actually is, science. All right. So, what drove it? Fear, for sure. Fear, for sure. And then you get a single-minded, narrow vision of what it is that you have to do in order to react to this, and everybody is piling on, and before you know it, it's a train wreck. All right, so that's on that side of the COVID argument. On the other side of the COVID argument is that the COVID alarmism was nothing more than a conspiracy to justify controlling the population, controlling them from a civic legal point of view, and B, controlling the population in terms of numbers. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. There are a lot of people out there who believe that the vaccine was actually designed to kill people. And I'm hearing people say, within 10 years, everybody that had a vaccine is going to be dead, regardless of age. Okay, if I live another 10 years, I'd like to live longer than 10 years, but if I live another 10 years, I'll be an elderly person. And if I happen to die at 70 or 71 years of age, well, I still think that that's relatively young in this day and age, but I wouldn't necessarily attribute it to the fact that I happened to get vaccinated 2 years ago. Anyway, we will see what's going to happen. But the conspiracy theory is that the COVID vaccine was designed in order to do just that. Kill people because the world is overpopulated, according to those who would be part of this conspiracy, and therefore we need to reduce the population of the world. Now, I have to tell you, there is no evidence to support this whatsoever. It's a theory. Everybody's entitled to have a theory, but there's no supporting evidence. And yes, I know that people have talked about this Bill Gates newspaper article. It's not true. The Bill Gates newspaper article is not true. It's misquoted. The context is completely wrong. And I know about this kind of thing because quite often I will say something and then it will be presented out of context. So I'm always very conscious of the context that I'm using and trying to make sure that people can't use my words out of context, but it happens. That's why people say that I'm a liberal when I'm most assuredly not a liberal. So There is no evidence of this. This is a conspiracy theory. People believe in it, and I'm sorry that people believe in it, but I'm sorry, I just don't believe it. Conspiracy on the right, or catastrophists on the right of me, or catastrophists on the left of me, conspiracy theorists on the right. Catastrophists on the left, conspiracy theorists on the right, catastrophists on the right, conspiracy theorists on... Nobody knows anymore where the truth lies. And again, as I said, that is a terrible situation to be in a free and democratic society where our opinion counts. Let me tell you about the world's population without getting into a lot of data and details. Anybody who thinks that the world is overpopulated, that's just nonsense, okay? It is absurd. You could fit everybody, every single individual in the world, you could fit into one of the smaller states in the United States. Every single person. You could fit every single person in the world in Ontario, where I live, and still have lots of room left over. There are regions in the world that are overpopulated and where people have difficulty, economic difficulty, difficulty finding food, proper nourishment, etc. There are regions in the world that are overpopulated. But the world as a whole is not overpopulated. And the regions in the world where we might say they're overpopulated, Japan, China, India, are three examples that come to mind immediately. Two of those are already undergoing population reduction. Not something that could happen 10 years from now, 50 years from now, by the turn of the century. Now, last year, Japan had a reduction in real terms of its population of over 600,000 people. They don't need a COVID vaccine in order to find ways to reduce the population. All you have to do is not have children. And that's what's happening in Japan. It's what's happening in China. It's what's happening to a greater degree every year in India. And it's what's happening in countries in Eastern Europe. And to a degree, it's what we see here in Canada and in the United States, where the birth rate is still right now above replacement level, but it has dropped significantly. And if we look at the whole world, the fact is that by the turn of the century, the world population will be decreasing. As we speak today, the rate of growth, because the population is still growing, but the rate of growth is slowing down. That's the trend. That's not just this year. It's not just last year. That has been the trend now for decades. We don't need a COVID vaccine in order to reduce the population of the earth. Because it's going to happen. And it's going to happen because we're not having babies. That's a little off topic, and perhaps even a little depressing. And that only means, ladies and gentlemen, that we have to go for our third break. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. Oh, such relaxing music. Okay. What else is going on today in the world? Look, um, let's wrap up this discussion about conspiracy theories. We could have a lot of fun with it. In fact, we should do a whole show just on conspiracy theories without trying to dig into details or anything like that. The bottom line is this, though, ladies and gentlemen. Look, chill out. The world is not coming to a disastrous end. Canada is not burning. On the one hand, on the other hand, and which means that there is no conspiracy to make Canada burn in order to buttress government claims that we have to do more to combat climate change. The climate is not changing at a catastrophic speed. It's probably not changing due to human activity, certainly not significantly so. First time I heard about the ocean levels rising 40 some odd years ago. Hasn't happened yet. And the 40 some odd years ago was not that long after we were all worried about the coming ice age. You don't have to worry, ladies and gentlemen. And this is the thing, okay? This is what's important about it. I know we've talked about already the importance in a democracy of not being so gullible when you're presented with things that at first glance look credible. Okay? I mean, a healthy dose of skepticism is actually a good thing. And so don't drink anybody's Kool-Aid. It doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right. All right? If you're like me, I don't believe any of it anymore. I want to show me the evidence. I want to see the evidence. And I want to think about it. I want to ask questions. I want to hear other people's opinions. And then I'll make my own judgment. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But most of the time, when you take your time and you're open-minded and you listen to different points of view and you don't automatically attack people because they don't agree with you, or you're not just trying to batter them with your own point of view, most of the time you end up in a pretty safe place. In a place that's pretty good. But there is another element to this that we need to consider, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just how we react and how we interact with our fellow citizens from a democratic society point of view. The real tragedy in all of this is what we're doing to our children. Whether we're on the right or the left, when we expose our children to the kind of conspiracy theories that we have, when we expose them to the kind of predictions of cataclysmic occurrences here on Earth, we are contributing to their levels of anxiety, and we just don't know where that's going to go. But it can't be anywhere good. And so my answer is to all of this is, ladies and gentlemen, chill out, take it easy. Certainly don't throw stones at me because I want to take the time to look into things, and because I'm prepared to recognize that sometimes the people that I disagree with politically, sometimes they can be right. Sometimes they can be right. And everybody on the left, okay, same thing goes. You need to recognize that more than sometimes those of us on the right are actually correct. But it's really important. It's so important, ladies and gentlemen. We have a responsibility, the silent majority, the ones who are not out there running to the microphones day in and day out, making a spectacle of themselves, demanding action, predicting that the sky is going to fall in, whether you're on the right or the left of the political spectrum. And I get it. I'm willing to concede that this happens more on the left than it does on the right. But the conspiracy stuff, I have to call it like I see it, ladies and gentlemen. I think there's more conspiracy theory emanating from the right than there is from the left. It's not black and white. It's not all one way or all the other way. But there's enough for me to say, Slow down, guys. Slow down. And especially when it comes to me, I'm on your side. I'm on your side. I just need to take the time to think things through, not panic, because in my experience, ladies and gentlemen, panic and anger never lead to a good place. They never do. All right. Still no word on the CRTC decisions on Fox News Network. They're going to take their time on this, I guess. Maybe they're going to wait until, Friday evening, sneak into decisions so that it's not international news. We'll see, but still no news. Check out the website, ladies and gentlemen, josephbenamy.com. All one word without the hyphen. While you're there, please join our email group. It's totally free, and we don't share emails with anyone. If you're watching the show on Rumble, subscribe, please. Doesn't cost anything. If you're watching the show on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button as well. Once again, doesn't cost you anything to do that, but it helps us to get our message out. All right. That's it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you tuning in. Join me again tomorrow night here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show, where we speak truth to power and anyone else who will take the time to be open-minded and listen.